person. Okay. Hey guys. Okay, hey everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tiffany. I'm one half of Little River Cooperative. This is Chris French, all of French Farms. This is Sawyer French. He feels like being a part of the video today, at least for a while. Maybe he'll get down in a second.
Bark at something.
Bark at something. Okay, we are super tired.
So tired.
Because I worked a plant sale at the nursery all day today, and Chris cover cropped his farm.
The hard way.
So we are feeling it, but we are going to rally and spend the next hour or so talking to you guys about planting techniques, because it's a really important part of gardening that people tend to be confused about, you know, and
Yeah.
we've had some people ask us like, oh, can you install a raised bed from start to finish or something? But so this is like the most important part technique wise of the raised bed from start to finish routine, I guess, like how to properly plant something. We're gonna talk about planning and plant spacing, which is also really challenging for people, and then we're gonna talk about planting varieties, and then we're gonna go, you see behind us there's a raised bed and we've emptied out most of it, and we're gonna plant in it. So you're gonna see the routine that we go through when we replant somewhere. Not a new bed, because this is like 2 years old, but just every time we plant, this is kind of like the motions that we go through. Okay. Oh yeah, and I'm supposed to say, for those of you that haven't watched one of these before, that we're on a private property and we are significant others, and so that's why we
No
are
masks.
sitting close together and not wearing masks, because this is a private property that is not open to the public, and we are quarantine pals. So
Moving along.
okay,
All right.
sorry. All right. Okay, so plant spacing is a very challenging thing for people to get past.
Especially if they don't know what the plant turns into.
Right,
You know?
because like we sell plants when they're babies, like starter seedlings are usually like around 6 weeks old,
Mm-hmm.
and they're tiny, tiny little babies. Like the plant that they're gonna be is like completely different, you know? And so every now and then, for example, someone will buy a bunch of plants from us, and right as they're finished checking out, they'll be like, do I need to put this in a different pot? And we're like, oh man, oh man, oh man. Like, yes. And also like stop buying plants, you know, because for now, because we want you need to really think about what type of plant that's going to turn into, because some of these plants can be kept in pots, some can't, some are trees, you know. None of them can be left in the pot that we sell them to you in, guaranteed, like officially.
It's maybe arugula.
No.
Not even arugula.
But there isn't really like a technique to knowing the proper plant spacing for all the plants. Like, it's just data. So the technique is Googling it.
More than Googling, it's about looking at good seed catalogs, and there's not all seed catalogs are created equal. A lot of them just like will have a lot more growing information, like a pull down that you can just get a lot more information, or they'll take you another page that talks about that crop in general, and so you can get a better feel. But then when Tiffany's saying Google, we're also saying Google image. One thing I like to do is, like, if I've never grown something, like say some sort of weird type of ginger, I want to know what it looks like, I'm going to Google ginger plant. Otherwise you're going to get a trillion pictures of just like ginger on a table. But you really need to see what the plant looks like, see how tall it's going to be, and you'll just glean a lot of clues. You know, maybe there'll be some farmer in Japan or that you know has these awesome pictures of their garden, and you know it'd be so enlightening if it's something weird like that. Okay.
Well, so also like this guy created this gardening technique called square foot gardening that I like to recommend to beginners. I don't love it.
There's a lot to.
There's some issues with like plant varieties and also like the soil he recommends and stuff, but the basic concept is you take your garden and you use actual visual markers like string or something to grid it out. So if you have a 4 by 8 foot raised bed, let's say, then you have 32 square feet in that raised bed, and you can turn them into like actual squares by just running string over it. You don't even have to tack it in, like you could just do it a few times just to help you learn. And then you can see like, and then there are all these charts, and I googled one for you guys. Look, you see this chart? You don't even have to read it, because what I'm trying to get, so in each foot, it's like the amount of those plants that would fit in a square foot. So like 1 bell pepper, 4, whatever that is, sunflowers, 9 radishes, 16 onions, you know? So it's like a visual way to show you guys how much space a plant will take up. And then if you go and you grid your garden, then you know, okay, a pepper takes up 1 square foot, so then you just plant your pepper in the center of one of those squares that the grid made. And that's like very, very clear, very visual, very beginners. The main problem with that is it doesn't have any of the weird tropical stuff listed, because it was made by someone in like Vermont or something.
Yeah.
So he does have a book, and like all the dates are wrong, all the varieties are wrong for us, you know. So it's not like the best resource, like the actual book, but there are tons of these charts online. And Chris also wants you guys to go to seed catalogs, and I'm gonna look one of those up for you as well.
Yeah, I think Johnny's is a really good one for the actual growing information. I mean, there's others, you know, I'm not just trying to rep Johnny's, but.
Well, no. So Johnny's Select Seed is basically the go-to for small farmers for all of their seed in America. They're in Maine, and they're employee-owned, and they have a lot of certified organic seed as well, and they're very cool. And they're for professionals, so it's not like a cutesy seed company like
they're
ours
selling,
with like just ornamental
selling it
seed
by the
packets.
pound, you know, instead of by the packet.
Right. So look, I'm gonna go on Johnny's, and I'm gonna pick broccoli.
Ooh, broccoli's a good one.
Okay, so I'm scrolling through. Okay, growing information. I'm going there. Okay, also things like days to maturity are on here, which is really great. Hold on. Okay, here, look.
Look, 43,000 plants to the acre. That means 1 plant per square foot. That's great.
But look, here it has, for example, direct seeding. This I picked broccoli rabe. It says sow 3 seeds per foot, 1/2 inch deep, rows 18 to 36 inches apart, thinning to 1 plant in each group. Translate that for them.
Okay. I mean, so the thing with a raised bed is, especially with broccoli or something that's getting big, you can kind of allow the thing to lean out of the bed. So I think that's also, so in a raised bed, in a 4 by 8 raised bed, I think I'd have 3 rows of broccoli, right? And I think I would put 18 inches between each plant.
But that's if you're filling it with broccoli.
But
like if you wanted to put 1 broccoli, like, then how would you explain this to someone? 1 per foot, basically.
Yeah, one. I'd give broccoli a little bit more space.
Okay, well.
But anyway, yeah.
So the thing about this type of information is it isn't square feet. It's another way. It's saying this is how close together you can plant the plants in a row, so in a long line, because if you think about farms, they're mostly growing things like in a long line. So they're like in a row, you can plant them 18 inches apart,
Yeah.
and then and then the rows need to be also spaced from each other. So this is saying 18 to 36 inches apart from each other, the rows, and then in the rows 18 inches. So 18 inches basically. So a foot and a half.
Yeah, in
square.
general, farms, when the spacing that they recommend for farms, they're going to put the plants closer together and then actually have more space, either for tractor wheels or airflow or whatever it is. Harvesters, that's important. You got to have room to walk in there. But they're gonna put more space between the actual rows, put the plants closer together in row. And that doesn't really have to be done in the home garden. In the home garden, usually you're thinking it more as like each plant needs this amount of like space and I'm gonna give it to them. Whereas when you're planting them in a row, they're gonna lean out this way, like the plants can kind of like fill in that space between the rows. Did I butcher that, or does that making sense?
I don't know. I feel like we're confusing people. Okay, so square foot gardening is like one eggplant needs a square foot, you know, and that's like kind of simpler maybe to explain than getting into like rows. But I'm just saying, if you go to a website like Johnny's, it's not going to say like a broccoli needs a square foot. It's going to say a broccoli needs 18 inches from its neighbor this way and 18 inches from its neighbor this way. You know what I mean? You have to think of like the X and the Y of the broccoli.
And you don't have to, like, if you're like, man, it's just, I can't give my plants that much space. Like, one example would be like beans. Like, people want to plant beans in their garden, and it's going to say rows 18 to 36 to 4 feet apart, like for pole beans. And that's just like, you don't need to adhere to that, because it's just, it's really set up for doing long rows, that sort of spacing. Whereas in the garden, you can kind of push things a little bit closer together.
But how do people know that? Like, you know that because you're a farmer. So like when someone's looking at trying to figure out how close together do I put my beans, like we can't tell them like just squish it all closer together. Like, what's the thought process, or like how do you decide which things to squish closer together? Because I feel like that wasn't helpful. Because
I'm tired.
Okay, so another thing is that I like to tell people is that farmers, like just in general, farmers forever, have been trying to plant things closer together since farming. Because obviously, like, you have an acre of land. If you can grow like 5,000 corn plants on that acre and sell each corn plant, like, I'm being really simple here, for like $1, then you're gonna make like $5,000. If you can plant 10,000 on that acre, you can make $10,000, but it doesn't really work
I think
that.
they're constantly experimenting. Like, oh, we put things too close together that year, let's like spread it out. You know, it's sort of like, I think everyone's sort of trialing and error. At least I know I am. Like, and you know, like something with arugula, I'm constantly adjusting the seed rate, you know, based on how much heat there is, because I noticed that like in the hotter times of year, if my arugula plants are super close together, there's more likely to be disease. But I'm going to space those rows of arugula a little bit more in the summer.
Well, what I was trying to say is that, like, if you go online and you research like how much room does my kale plant need, and it says a square foot or a foot and a half or something, you know, but you're holding this little plant in your hands that you bought from us, and you're like, there's no way that this needs a foot and a half, and so you decide to plant 6 there, you're not going to get 6 like happy, healthy kale plants just because you were like, I'm going to just put way more in this space. There's always a trade-off. Like, plants can feel each other with their leaves. So when two plants and their roots. So when two plants that you planted too close together are touching their leaves, they can feel it. Also, they're competing underground where you can't see their roots like all going for the same resources like water and nutrients.
And they're competing for sunlight.
And they're competing for sunlight.
Most of all.
So one way that you can get around feelings like that, for example, you have a kale plant and it's going to grow big, kind of like a fountain, because they grow tall as you harvest their outer leaves. They kind of become like little palm trees. Also, they're this big when they're babies, little tiny things. So you're putting them in as a baby. Farms will do something called interplanting a lot to take advantage of their spacing in their fields, and you can do the same thing. So for example, like you can plant a bunch of tomatoes in the back of your bed, and right underneath them, because they're babies now, you can plant like a whole row of arugula or radishes
or something
because
else
radishes
small and
grow in 21 days. You can pull out a French breakfast radish if it has full sun. So you can plant like a bunch of little radishes right next to the tomatoes, way close together, like something that you would never do if your tomato was fully grown. But when it's a baby, sorry, we're near the airport. When it's a baby, it doesn't need as much space, so you can take advantage of that space. And as it grows, the radishes come out. They go into your kitchen, and then that tomato needs that space. So we do that in people's raised beds all the time. Like we'll kind of like overplant things in the beginning with a selection of long-term crops, which are usually the big ones, like cabbages, kales, peppers, eggplants, tomatoes. Like those are going to be in your garden for a really long time, and then we'll speckle around them short-term crops, and then those short-term crops you'll just harvest, and then the big ones will get bigger and use the space. So you can look for data on, for example, like how long a crop takes to grow, and that can tell you like what to interplant.
Dates to maturity.
Yeah, dates to maturity. That'll be on a website like Johnny's, somewhere where you're buying seeds. And again, you don't have to buy the seeds from Johnny's. You can just use all the information on the website to be like, oh, Tokyo Becana Asian greens, 21 days to baby. You know, so then you'll direct seed them in between, I don't know, like a bunch of cabbages, and then 21 days later you harvest the whole thing, and then the cabbages need the space. Interplanting.
Cabbages get big. But anyway, I want to talk about when people get seed packets and they accidentally dump the whole seed pack, or maybe they intentionally dump it all out, but they get a cucumber bag and like, oh, I'm going to plant cucumbers here. And so they'll put they'll just almost like, or maybe they spill out, I don't know, but they'll just like, you go and look at their garden and there's like 4 or 5, like 30 cucumber plants growing in one little spot. And yeah, you screwed up, but it's okay. Like you can literally just take your scissors and thin the plants and just leave like 2 of the strongest plants in that area. And so.
But what it's not okay to do is leave all 30 cucumbers.
Yeah, it just
so
won't work.
we see that on like gardening groups all the time. People will post pictures of like a pot that's a foot around, and somebody scooped like their whole zucchini in there because they heard zucchinis grow easily or something. So now there's like 90 zucchini seedlings in a pot, and I love saying this to people, like, and I know I mentioned it in the first workshop we did, but just because something has sprouted, it does not mean that everything is working out. The sprouting of a seed is one of the easiest parts. All a plant needs to sprout is consistent moisture and the darkness of being under soil. And some of them don't even need the darkness, but a lot of them do. Just the consistent moisture. They also don't need any nutrients for the first 21 days of their life. So like, you can plant 100 zucchini plants in a pot this big for the first 14 days, and they're gonna look great because they germinate really quickly and they make really big leaves, and again, they don't need any nutrients from you. They have all the nutrients in their germ. And so people think like, oh my God, this is doing great, you know, but you need to have like one plant. I mean, a pot, like the example I'm giving, like isn't even big enough for one plant. So yeah, you need to kind of like learn some hard lessons about plant spacing, you know, either by trial and error, like a lot of people are saying like, oh, it just takes experience, you know, but like I do think that while a lot of this does take experience, like we were talking before we went live and we were like, how do we explain plant spacing? And honestly, it's like every year that you garden, you research the plants that you're interested in growing and their plant spacing, and then you just start to memorize it, you know?
Yeah, and change it. Like I can remember like last year I planted my tomatoes at 16 inches and like I was a little too tight, so like, you know, just adjust it. I think one thing to talk about while we're on the subject of planting things in clumps accidentally, there are a lot of things that you can plant in a lot of seeds in one little tiny area, and it works out. Usually leafy greens are like that. Like even your kale, like you accidentally dump the kale package out and all of these little kale plants pop up. You know, at 21 days you can go and harvest a bunch of that kale as baby kale, and many farmers do that, or gardeners do that. They like want baby leaf kale, and if you leave just one plant, it'll grow up and get big above all the rest.
And become like the mama kale.
So that's kind of called thinning, where you start with a bunch and then you end up with one or two or the correct number. But in general, and I think we should just like list a bunch of things that like kind of
I think so too.
plant in clumps.
It's hard to know which plants can be planted in clumps. But basically, like cilantro, you're not gonna get more cilantro from planting a cilantro seed and then 6 inches away a cilantro seed.
Yeah.
So
I mean, those will be beautiful, big, happy cilantro plants, but
they're gonna make you like 8 leaves.
Yeah, and it's gonna take too long to get the cilantro. That's also another thing. You're waiting for this parsley or cilantro to get really big, whereas if you had planted some seeds closer together, they didn't mind, and you're gonna be able to harvest that and get a bigger bunch of the cilantro or parsley. Some other ones, like we mentioned, arugula is a good one to plant in a clump. Swiss chard doesn't seem to mind, although Swiss chard will turn into a large plant if given the space. We like to sort of plant it in clumps.
Scallions.
Oh yeah, scallions. Dill.
Look, dill. On Johnny's seed, it says for cilantro, I think this is kind of like a good indicator. It says plant spacing 2 inches apart.
Perfect.
So that's like a indication that you can plant a bunch of seeds very close together in a little bouquet.
Yeah, so I do that at my farm because I don't want to sit, like, I don't ever have good luck direct seeding cilantro, or sometimes I have. So then what I do is I plant a clump in my cell tray to be transplanted, and I turn that 2 inches into 8 inches. So, but effectively I have the same amount of seeds, like it kind of works itself out with the sunshine there. I'll have like 10 seeds every 8 inches versus 1 seed every 2 inches or whatever. I know the math doesn't exactly work out there, but
there's also, like, if you buy the potted herbs from somewhere like Whole Foods or whatever, you'll notice that if you buy, like, let's say a basil, there's 10 basil plants in there. And so a lot of basils can be clump planted. I don't know, is there like a term for that? Clump planted? Parsley. Parsley is a clump planter.
Yeah.
Someone's saying fenugreek. What about you? Love fenugreek.
I haven't grown it yet. I kind of dropped the ball last time I grew it, but fenugreek. Who said fenugreek? What weird planter? Nice one.
There's other things too that if you come and you buy a plant from us and it has a bunch of plants in it, that's us telling you without telling you that these plants are supposed to be planted in clumps. And I think like plenty of other
I can't think of anything that
farmy resources.
I can't think of anything that makes a fruit that we would do that with. So if it's a fruiting crop,
it needs to be alone.
Where it's going to be.
Or you know what? If it gets
singular.
really big, it needs to be alone. Like we don't do that with kale or whatever because we want it to get really big.
Yeah, and kale germs so well, so we don't ever have to like add more seeds to the cell for that.
Okay, so I guess what we want to do is plant stuff for you because we're trying to keep this one under an hour. So we really this is more about showing you the actual techniques. Like you're gonna watch me plant some stuff.
Okay, and I'm gonna so you know you're doing it wrong.
And then Chris is gonna be like Tiffany's the worst planter ever. Because he's full of opinions. Okay.
Are you ready?
Okay, I need to go get some plants from the nursery. So talk to them for a second.
Talk to them.
About plants.
Talk about plants? Oh man, I don't know.
I'm gonna get like a 6-pack and I'm gonna get some peppers for the next plant.
Oh, she left me here all alone. I'm nervous. I'm so nervous. Some things you can plant surprisingly close together, even though they're kind of big. Onions are a good example of one. I mean, so long as you have enough nutrition in your bed. Like some of the onions would be spaced at like 4 inches, so you're really just trying to maximize it. And onions don't make a ton of foliage; it's kind of upright, and so they're not really competing with each other there for the sunlight. But we can't stress enough to like really figure out what the plant looks like, and that'll really give you a clue. You know, a cabbage is this big, but a cabbage plant is like this big. You know, it's making all these leaves, and just in the center it has like a little head. So you go to the store, you buy cabbage, don't think that you can space those cabbages at like 8 inches or something like that. You know, another classic example is cauliflower. We almost just sort of discourage people from planting cauliflower in a small garden because of how massive it can get. Like, I think 2 or 3 or 4 cauliflower plants can almost swamp an entire 4x8 raised bed. Sometimes with these crops, we actually put them closer together to force them to make a flower earlier. A great example is Chinese broccoli, or even normal broccoli. Like, there's so much to broccoli. It's funny. Like some people are really trying to get a second cut out of their broccoli, and so they'll actually make so the plants can get bigger. They'll give the plant more space, and so you'll get one big head, but then the plant will be nice and healthy, and you'll get lots of side shoots. Okay, are we ready to move on?
Okay, you're the cameraman. Pick this thing up and flip it around.
Alrighty. There we go. Okay.
Get closer.
Prepare the soil for. Okay.
Okay, so.
What do you? Go ahead.
This is a raised bed that's been here since we moved here 3 years ago. We have 4 raised beds here, and we just plant them so that people can look at them.
I don't like how like twisty all the irrigation lines
so
are. Are you
look,
gonna fix that? It's messing up my OCD.
We're gonna just get all this out of the way.
Okay, yeah. Drip irrigation always seems to be like either in the way or working great. I don't know.
Okay,
Never
so
working great.
Let me do that.
Okay.
Okay. So we pulled a bunch of plants out of here earlier, and we left it kind of a mess so that it would be like a little natural. Like, okay, so after a full season of growing, your soil might look a little bit like this. I'm not sure like what the definition is like on this thing, but this soil is very gray, like kind of light colored.
Well, it's been really dry though. Okay.
The gray color is from an excess of sand. You can test your soil to see how much sand is in it by basically like taking a bunch of it, putting it in a jar with water, and then not touching it, shaking it, and then not touching it. And the different layers will separate themselves based on like buoyancy or whatever. And you can see how much sand you have in it, but I don't need to do that to this to tell that I have a ton of sand. Plants will actually consume organic material in your garden. So like that's why, for example, it's best to put compost in as you're planting instead of like pre-composting or whatever, because the plants will use it right away. Not only will the plants use it, but the soil life will also metabolize it. And what were you saying yesterday, Chris, that it'll also just evaporate?
Oh yeah, if you compost can oxidize and literally just
that's the word, oxidize. Okay.
carbon will disappear into the atmosphere.
So like I would never just plant new plants right into this, because all of the organic material has been used already. That's why it's been left so sandy. Also, it's like very dry, very sandy soil is referred to as hydrophobic. That means literally afraid of water. So this is not gonna retain very much moisture for my new plant's resistance. And also this is relatively compacted. So this is like our all-around gardening tool of choice here. It's a hand hoe. So I feel like in like movies and TV shoots and stuff, people are always gardening with a trowel, like a spade, you know, just a straight thing. But I don't know anyone that actually uses those.
I use an old kitchen knife a lot.
Okay, Chris uses a kitchen knife, but he's prepped his soil already, so it's kind of different. You you shouldn't be making a little hole and sticking a plant in and the rest of your soil is hard. I think that's why we can do things like use kitchen knives, because like we go and we prep all the soil by like churning, adding, fertilizing everything all at once. And then once you've done that, you don't need a tool at all. You literally can just shove your hand in, move the soil aside, put the plant there and tuck it back in and you're done. So
Everybody's just talking about blue basil, by the way. Anyway.
that's not what we're here to discuss. So I'm just like churning up my soil a little bit. We kind of like pre-did this as well. If you had a lot of roots in here, this would be a time to get rid of some of them. So if you had a ton of root competition, like not only would this be a time for you to notice, like, oh hey, I have a lot of root competition, like this is really challenging. And then you would need to maybe like think about your garden, think about the roots that are coming into it, and like what you would maybe need to do to change it to make it not like that. But you can also just kill the roots and kind of pull them out. Get yourself a few more months. So look, I'm only jiggling this soil around and loosening it like this deep, so 6 inches.
And if it's already loose and you don't have a lot of root competition, you don't necessarily have to do this. I think Tiffany just sort of...
I like it because then I can plant really easily.
Yeah.
If you've got a big area like this, it's cool to go through these chopping motions, you know? It just makes the whole process easier on you, I find. And we really like as a gardening team, we have a routine when we go to gardens. We pull out old plants, we prep the soil, and then we plant. We don't like move through and think like, this plant is bad, I will pull it out, then I will dig around in this spot only and I'll use my fertilizer and my tool only here, and then I'll go over to my plants and I'll put a little plant here. We like go step by step on the whole thing. So that's like kind of what I'm doing for you guys. Okay, so then I brought 2 buckets of fresh soil over here.
All right. Somebody asked a question about perennials and annuals in the same bed, and that is a good question because I feel like sometimes it is really annoying when you're like working around your giant rosemary bush and you're trying to like plant some new stuff, but you don't want to kill your rosemary. So it is some, if you have the space to do it, it is nice to have some forethought and think about, yeah, like I don't want to, like, I'm not going to have to rip all my Mediterranean herbs out, or, you know, like because you would be damaging the root systems. But it's surprising how much damage these root systems can take. So you can sort of work around plants. We've even like dug them up or like lifted them without damaging all their roots. Okay, moving on.
Okay, so can you see in the video the color difference on this stuff? The new soil?
It's darker.
Okay, yes, it's darker because it's holding moisture. It's a little bit wet, and darker material, wet material is darker. This is like all organic matter. There's 0 sand in our soil mix on purpose, because we were told by our soil experts who helped us come up with it. He's like, why are you gonna move sand around?
Yeah.
There's like so much sand native here.
What's that saying? Like bringing sand to the beach?
Yeah, it's like, don't bring sand to the beach. Don't put soil mix that has sand in it in your garden. And so this is gonna be like just what this soil needs in order to have like a more balanced inorganic to organic material ratio.
And it's going to help with that moisture retention.
Yeah, and moisture. So then I've got my organic granular fertilizer here. This is the stuff that we sell to people. Its NPK ratio is 8:4. So it's kind of high on nitrogen. The reason why we like that is because most people that are buying, there's a bee. Most people that are buying fertilizer from us are mostly growing greens and herbs. And those are plants that use a lot of N. N is nitrogen. Nitrogen is what plants use to make leafy growth, leaves, you know, leaves that we eat, like arugula or cilantro or kale. We tend to use, like if this were a brand new bed of 4x8 and we were fertilizing it for the first time, we'd use 12 of these peat pots of fertilizer in it. And this fertilizer is such a low NPK 824 in comparison to conventional fertilizers, so chemical ones, not organic ones, that you can never really add too much to your soil to burn your plants. What having too much would do for your plants is it would maybe make them more susceptible to pest damage, because they're gonna have like very, very tender new growing shoots, and those tender growing shoots can be problematic with pests. But you're not gonna like burn your plants, you know, like you would with too much chemical fertilizer.
So that's like a little 6-ounce cup there, right? So you said six of those.
12 if it was new, but here I'm estimating, you know, we don't take this part terribly seriously.
Yeah, it's almost like there's too many variables to get caught up in, like, you kind of just, because, yeah, I mean, she's going to be planting different species in here. They might have different fertilizer requirements, but don't get caught up in the weeds there.
Okay, so I put 5 cups out there because I just felt it.
She just felt it.
I just felt it. Like 5 cups, you know? 12 if we
It looks right? Like it doesn't look like too much. It doesn't look like too little. I don't know. Let's like sort of zoom in here so you can get so that everyone can feel it. Yeah. So it's like a nice sprinkling, you know, like if you're making cinnamon toast or something. You want to do a good job.
Chris French loves cinnamon toast. Okay,
Yeah.
so now what I'm gonna do is sort of like just chop all this stuff together. I like to tell people when they come here to buy material, I'm like, oh, you basically do it like you're baking. What are you doing?
Nothing.
Okay, so just basically act like you're baking, like you want to just mix it all in, and when you're done, you shouldn't see any fertilizer. It's all just gonna kind of get like jostled around with the new soil and the old soil. So look, I'm just gonna chop it in.
This is something I disagree with Tiff here. I really like to use a rake to do this.
Okay,
But they like to roll with just like one tool, and that tool really is a nice tool for kind of one tool for everything. But
right, one tool.
I'm a rake type of guy.
We don't like to like get on our knees or whatever either while we're doing this, because it's harder to move around. We try to just like stay upright. Here I am chopping stuff in.
Mm-hmm.
Getting rid of debris, but it's not a big deal. And I'm also trying to like a little bit, you know, not too crazy, but I am gonna try and leave this a little bit level, like not totally crazy.
Once again, why I like to use the rake so much.
Alright, okay. But look, this acts like a rake. You use the flat end. You and your rake.
Yeah, it'd be done by now.
Shush. Do a little bit of that, almost done. Kristen's rake would have been done by now. Chop, chop, chop. So they can't see the fertilizer anymore. Put a shell in here.
Sometimes I've accidentally just left all my fertilizer right at the surface just because I was like, I don't know, maybe in a moment of no-till or just too lazy or didn't have a great way of doing it. And what'll end up happening if all your fertilizer is too close to the surface is the plant will put all its roots really close to the surface because that's where it's getting its food. And if you do that, often what'll happen is the plants will be more likely to get shocked by, basically if the top of the bed dries out, the plant will wilt because it put too much of its roots right at the surface. So there is something about getting the fertilizer a little deep.
Also, we will, if we're working in a bed that's mostly planted, we'll dig a hole and put fertilizer in the hole. But we don't like that as a go-to technique, especially if we have a nice palette to work with like this, an empty space, because kind of like the soil, the fertilizer on top of the soil thing, like it'll bring the roots to the surface. If you just put like a ton of delicious, nutritious fertilizer in the soil right where the roots are, then it's not going to encourage the plant to make adventurous feeder roots, because what's going to make your plants really resilient and hardy in a raised bed like this is their ability to move throughout the raised bed underground without you even knowing it, and forage for like nutrients, minerals, and water. So you want to encourage them to move around and explore and look for food. And so
Yeah.
that's why like baking like this and getting it like evenly distributed and not just putting it in the hole is a good technique. Okay. Where are my plants?
Plants.
Oh. Okay, so look. This raised bed, I'm standing on the north side of this raised bed. And in general, you should keep your taller plants on the north side of your bed. The reason why is because, okay, I'm facing south, in the winter especially, but also now a little bit, the sun is like not directly overhead.
I think it's
Instead,
directly overhead right now. Just
June
to,
21st is directly overhead.
well, I know, but it's pretty much directly overhead right
Okay,
now.
whatever. Because we mostly garden in the winter, we have the habit of considering the south to be like the premium exposure for sun hitting your raised beds. So we tend to put stuff that's tall on the north end so that if the sun is at a slight angle when it comes and hits your bed, if the low stuff is in the front and the tall stuff is in the back, everything is getting hit by a slightly lowered sun. Hopefully that makes sense.
But we have a little less concern of that now that
A
we're
little
moving.
bit less.
Now that we're moving into the summer. Yeah.
But in general, it's a very
Yeah.
good
I think
thing
for
to think about.
I think for summer gardens, I think it's cool to plant your tall stuff on the west side, because then some of your plants are getting like an afternoon shade. You know, like say you have like a big cranberry hibiscus or roselle like on the west side to kind of shade the other stuff. But anyway,
Okay, so look, I brought some plants over. I brought an eggplant, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stage these, which is another really good routine to get into. So this eggplant I'm gonna put right back here. Eggplant, I like to give them like 2 square feet, roughly. So these are zinnias that I didn't kill because they have buds on them. I felt bad for them.
yeah.
So I left them here like little soldiers, and then I'll put my eggplant in between them. My eggplant will take up this space.
Eggplants making big fruit, need some big space for it.
That's right. Okay, and then I have a spicy pepper. I'm gonna put my spicy pepper here in the middle, about 18 inches away from its neighbors. And what is the word for when there's like 2 things and then 1 thing in the middle like that?
Staggered.
Cattywampus.
Cattywampus? Not just staggered?
Staggered, right. So instead of putting plants next to each other like this, you know, like let's say you were putting a bunch of plants in this row,
Yeah.
instead of doing this where they're all the same, you get better use out of your space if you, whatever the word is then.
Yeah, because you don't have to drive a tractor through your bed. So I
Right.
mean that makes total sense.
So
Like,
look, these plants are further apart now than they would have been if they were like this, and which is so it's better use of space.
I think that's a really good point.
Okay, so I'll leave it like this actually, just for fun. So this is an amaranth, pepper, amaranth. All right, that's my next row. Then I want to have, I'm gonna take this Okinawa spinach. Okinawa spinach is what I like to consider a mounding plant. And oregano is a good example of another mounding plant.
There's some good examples of mounding plants behind you.
Oh yeah. My rose geranium, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
My
It's
rose
a nice
geranium
mound.
is a mounding plant. It makes a mound. Zucchini would be considered a mounding plant. It like makes a big, low, wide thing, and its growth pattern is kind of like out and around. So I'm gonna choose to put this guy in a corner for a few reasons. One, he's a perennial. That means that if I choose to cover crop this bed in like 2 months, or if I choose to replant it with fall crops, I can kind of like work around a happy plant that's in a corner. So we tend to put like perennial herbs in corners all the time. Like an oregano, it goes in the corner.
Always.
Always.
The oregano's always in the corner.
Always in the corner. A rosemary is in the corner. Another thing, Chris was like, oh, a lot of plants like to fall out of your raised bed. And we really like to take advantage of that space because the important thing about the raised bed is all of this delicious nutrient-rich soil that we added to the raised bed. A plant's leaves will be happy in this airspace,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll be happy in this airspace. they don't care. They want their roots in the raised bed. So like, we also plant Everglades cherry tomatoes in corners, and like pumpkins and stuff in corners, because we'll get to put their roots in the raised bed, and then we'll get to take advantage of some of this alternative space. So I'm putting my Okinawa spinach, which is a perennial, and a mounder, just going over here in the corner. This is a basil. It has like a lot of basil plants in here. Sometimes, almost as like a nervous habit too, I'll take out the smallest ones, because I feel like my plant will do better if it has like 8 basils than if it has 13.
Yeah.
So I like to just pick out like the runts in these pots, and then I'll leave it like that.
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, and we're guilty of this too, is when you're trying to sell a plant, you're actually putting a little bit more in there for insurance, and also to make it look bigger.
Yeah. So I go through and I pick out the runts, and this is a cinnamon basil, and he's going cattywampus from these two guys.
That is not some.
I don't know what the word is. Like that. Okay. And then I brought this amaranth. I know I went overboard with amaranth, but I'm like lacking in plants inside. We sell a lot of those plants that we were referring to earlier as clumping. We will sell them in 6-packs, and other people will also do that. Like Home Depot will sell them in like little packages too, like lettuces and stuff. This is like a plug.
I think I need to shift because of the sun here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I just need to shift.
Want to go over there?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry, guys.
You're gonna fall.
Don't get seasick on us. Okay, yeah, it's a little better here.
Okay, so remember, I'm on the low side and you're on the tall side of the planting area here. So these plugs, this is usually for really quick growing greens. So like mustard, arugula, cilantro, dill. But this time of year, we really like amaranth as like a salad leaf alternative. So okay, so for planting these, I like to put them in lines, just a few inches apart. And with a really happy, healthy one like this, where the roots are very full in the cell, they're really not that delicate. You can literally just take them out and like throw them in your garden. Okay, and then I'm gonna direct seed this next. That's gonna be like my next thing.
Yeah.
So I'm leaving it empty for now. So look, because I've properly prepped this whole bed, I barely need to do anything with tools. I work without gloves on all the time, but I imagine a lot of people would choose to do this part with gloves. But basically, this soil is already like nice and loose and ready to go and fertilize. So I just like put my fingers in and I make a little hole, and then I tend to refer to the planting of plants as tucking them in. Chris, get a little closer. Because
You gonna tuck me in?
Because we're not planting them. People just tend to get like really overly aggressive about burying plants. You want to cover the surface of the plant that you bought, but just barely. So like, I've made a hole, I've put this guy in, and I'm just tucking him in.
Yeah, it's almost like an unsatisfying amount of work. Like it's
it's like nothing.
And when we plant with kids, they always want to just like keep pressing on the soil.
I know, they're like, smash it, but
Yeah.
And another thing that we're not doing, I see people do this all the time, they want to they either want to make a mound for some reason, I'm not sure where that comes from, or they want to smooth it out like very perfectly, make it like this. One of the
I think it's
things-
just fun to touch the soil like that. That's
Yeah,
why.
touch it, but also leave it in a specific way. One of the things that we really like to do is like when we're covering our plant, we're tucking it in, we like use our fingers and we just leave a few fingerprints like that, because we want to have a little bit of texture to the soil's surface, so that when we go and water everything in, watering in is just like the thing, like the first watering, which is absolutely essential to do like right when you're done planting. When we do that, we want these fingerprints to like catch little pools of water and draw, so that the water can slowly percolate through the soil and go right to the plant's roots.
Yeah, so having a little divot is going to sort of direct that water down towards the roots, and and she's not like making a science project out of it. She's just leaving sort of like some little divots there, a little bit of contour. They actually do that in the desert when they're planting wildflowers. They call it imprinting.
Yeah,
of
they'll
all
actually,
things.
there are tractors that have implements that go behind them, and they just like rib the sand surface, and that's like this really cool way of like undesertifying areas, because once those divots are there, then that one time when it runs, instead of the soil being like too hard and too flat and all the water like running off and causing what are they called, mudslides and stuff, the water will be held, and then it will be allowed to very slowly permeate into the soil.
Yeah.
So look,
definitely
this
a
guy,
passive rain harvesting technique.
this guy,
Sure.
what you can do if you want to use your tool is like you put it in and then you just hold the soil out of place like that, or in its new place. You're just holding the soil out of the way.
Like a shoehorn.
Yeah, like a shoehorn. You're not like digging a hole, and you're not like, where do I put the soil? Oh, I guess I'll put it over here. No, you just like make a thing and get it out of the way. Put it in, and then move it, and then it just like landslides back into place like that. Boom. Perfectly planted plant. And then I'll give it its little sign. This one's a little bit bigger pot. So I will kick a little bit of the soil out, but again, I just shoehorn.
Do you think at this point we should talk about like plants that are root bound or?
Yeah, maybe.
Because
yeah,
I think
sure.
Tiffany and I were talking earlier about how like I think a lot of people like have this thing where they have to like rip all the roots off a plant, and you really only have to do that if the plant is super root bound, and in general like damaging those roots is not necessary. The plant is going to figure it out.
Yeah, look, see this guy? One of the reasons why we like to sell a lot of our plants in these peat pots is because transplanting is a complicated time for your plant. You want to disturb its root system actually as little as possible. So this sort of old-timey, like make sure you stab your root pot area and rip it up is very counterproductive for us. So basically, the way that we tell people to handle these is like, you'll see roots coming through the peat pot, like 2/3 of the way down. Those roots, you don't want to like rip those off. You want to leave them, because this will slowly biodegrade in the soil and the roots will just keep growing. But if you leave a lip of peat pot sticking out of the soil, it will wick moisture away from the root system. Just because of science, it will just take moisture from down low and bring it up into the air and get rid of it. So we like to just tell people to peel, very passively peel the top off so that there isn't a lip, and you can put the peel anywhere. And then again, you just hold the soil out of the way, put the pot in, and then give it a little tuck. And then with these guys, we just give them a squeeze.
More amaranth.
Right out. Yes, sorry. I do have an excess of amaranth, so that's why we're learning with amaranth.
Well, amaranth is kind of one of those ones where like we don't want it to become a massive plant. It's almost nicer. Like Tiffany, you put those amaranths really close together, and I think that was.
That's 'cause they're for baby leaf.
Yeah, because she doesn't want them to turn into like the full-grown amaranth. She'd rather have like a bunch of small leafy plants earlier. So that's kind of like what we do with arugula in a sense. We don't want like a ginormous arugula plant in all its glory. We want like that first harvest as soon as we can get it.
Okay, all my plants are in, but I want to direct seed some stuff.
Okay. One moment. Here she comes.
Okay, I'm gonna direct seed mustard. Mustard is basically arugula. Arugula is the most famous mustard, but there are all these other really cool mustards that people know a little bit less about, but they're really amazing to grow this time of year for salad.
Yeah, there are so many. I mean, all the big seed companies have like 100 different really fun mustards. You can get lost in that section for a while.
Okay, so for direct seeding stuff, what I like to do, first off, you need to label it, because you're basically like, you're gonna do something in empty soil, and then when you're done, it's gonna look like you didn't do anything in empty soil. And I also really like it when people label stuff in general with the date so that they know when to harvest it. So I'll write mustard.
Well, that's a big plant tag.
I know it is. Is today the 10th? Yes. I put 9/10. Woo! It's been a long day. Okay, 5/10. And then I'm gonna put it over here so it's not in our way. So this is my mustard patch. I don't even really
Uh-oh.
Okay, hold on.
We are getting to the maximum amount of time that we can have a video.
Tell them that you're gonna stop it.
We're gonna stop it. We're gonna be right back, guys.
Okay, do it.
Right back.